up, fam? It's your favorite cousin, your favorite uncle, your favorite nephew, your favorite father, your favorite son, your best friend's best friend. It's me, Dr. Larry, and welcome to Living For You, the YouTube channel. This is a safe space, a positive place in which we come together, we learn together, we grow together on this journey that we all are on, which is called life. So this is a fabulous place. It is one of the most positive, best places you can be out here on these internet streets. So welcome, welcome, welcome. My lovely family, you always know I always shout you guys out first because you guys support me and you guys have subscribed and you have been here, most of you, since day one, really, or not since day one, but since the very beginning. And you guys have still been rocking with me. You hit me up on social media, you send me emails, you buy my book, you've done all kinds of things, and you guys are just wonderful, 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 and I love you, love you, love you, family. To those of you who watch from the periphery, who always come in and tune in and watch significant amounts of my videos, who haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, join the family. Like I said, it's a positive place, it's a safe space, it's a good place for us to be here together. So go ahead and subscribe. There's nothing you can lose, only you can gain so much for being right here at this moment, right now, every time we come here. For those of you who have never seen me, I am Dr. Larry Smith. I'm a certified life and spiritual coach. I'm also an entrepreneur. I own a business called Live For You Coaching. And what I do is I help my clients overcome a trauma so that they can live more present and enjoy the life that we all deserve, which is a good life. We all deserve a good life. So if you want to know more about me, you can actually go and check out my website, check out the business page at www.liveforyoucoaching.com. That is www.liveforyoucoaching.com, and there's so much stuff out there that you can go and see. And if you'd like to sign up for some coaching, or if you'd like to sign up for some classes out there, feel free to do that as well. There's actually a free one out there called the Positive Me worksheet and all of that other stuff. It's a positive energy boost. It's free. Go out there and enjoy and indulge in that. To those of you who want to follow me on social media, where I post educational things, entertaining things, inspirational things, spiritual things, holistic health things, all kinds of things out on social media, you can follow me at Dr. Larry Smith on both Instagram and Facebook. That is Dr. Larry Smith on both Facebook and Instagram. If you want to just keep up with me, I post 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 times a day, but I post quite a bit out on social media. So go ahead and follow me, comment, share, like the video, do all these things today. Alright, so anyway, I wanted to get on today and talk about trauma. I wanted to talk about 3 ways to know that you are still dealing with the trauma. A lot of us are on set to where if we've dealt with stuff, traumatic experiences, we tend to just move on, but we don't always tend to heal and deal with our trauma. So I'm going to talk about 3 ways to know that you're still dealing with an unresolved trauma in your life. Now, for those of you who don't know what trauma is, I'm going to put the definition here on the screen so that you can read it and kind of understand what trauma is and what I mean. Because trauma can come in many forms, whether it's sexual, physical, verbal, the loss of a loved one. It can be many different things, but trauma has a deep impact on all those. In fact, I read a statistic somewhere that said worldwide, 70% of people, adults surveyed, had experienced a trauma. 70%, that's a lot of people. And then I also read that out of that, 30-something percent, I think it was like 34%, has experienced 4 or more traumas. That's a big deal. This is really kind of seeming to be a pattern that we've experienced trauma, and there are some of us who experience trauma upon trauma upon trauma. And then there was this quote that said, even the birth process, being born into this world, can create a trauma. So if that's the case, then 100% of us who are on this planet may have experienced some type of trauma in our lives. Nevertheless, as much as we know that it is such a prevalent problem, most people just tend to push through and don't acknowledge it, don't deal with it, and assume because they're not acknowledging it and they're not dealing with it, that it is not present in their lives. But it is definitely present in your life. Whether you know it, other people might can see it, and other people can feel it as they experience you. Because trauma is something that once it's on you, if it's not dealt with, if it's not healed, if it's not addressed, it persists and it stays with you, and it manifests itself in so many other ways throughout our lives. This is why it's super important that we deal with trauma. This is why I have made it part of my business and my mission in life to help people move beyond their trauma and to be more present, because trauma only holds you to the moment to which you experience the trauma, which is in the past. And so it's like, or it keeps you anticipating the future, wondering, one day I'll be better. One day I'll feel better about life and myself and all these things. But the reality of it is that they should be right now. You should feel good about yourself right now and not be holding on to something that happened to you yesterday. Nevertheless, here are 3 things to consider, to think about, to let you know that you are still experiencing trauma. 1, if anybody asks you about the situation you've been through, you get upset. You get upset, you get defensive. So say if there's a sexual trauma that you can have been through. I've been through sexual trauma. Other people I know have been through sexual trauma. It's a common occurrence in many communities across the world. But if you haven't dealt with it, anytime anybody talks about that sexual trauma that you've been through, or that physical trauma, or whatever trauma you've been through, it creates an anger emotion in you. You get upset, you get defensive, you get combative, you begin to argue, and no one can ever bring it up. You know why? That's because you're still sore. That's because you're still sensitive to what you've been through, and you have not healed. Even though you don't acknowledge it, you have not healed through that trauma. Your way of dealing is just to ignore. It's almost like a cut. If somebody cuts your arm right now, it's going to take days, weeks, if not months, for that scar to go away. But until that scar actually goes away, you're going to always feel the sensitivity to touch. Now, if you don't take the time to go to that scar and to treat it and to use the alcohol or the peroxide or the bandaging or whatever else you need, that scar is going to eventually heal, but the healing process will be slow. So if you don't tend to it, if you don't deal with it, then it's going to deal with itself. It's just not going to go away as quickly, and it may even get worse before it gets better, and all of this other stuff. That's the same way trauma works. That even if you don't directly address it and work on healing it, it heals, but it heals slowly. And you're still sensitive. And it might get worse before it gets better because you're not addressing a real situation that you have gone through or that you are still experiencing residue from. So generally when you talk to people who are still in their trauma or in their traumatic mind, as I call it, they tend to be defensive. They tend to be angry whenever the conversation comes up about that particular trauma. Another thing that people who are still, the second thing that people who are still dealing with their trauma tend to do is they tend to try to compensate for that feeling of loss or that feeling of loneliness in another way. So they might be hyper workers. They work 14 hours a day. They always are cleaning up. They always are doing something. They're busy, and they're always doing something. And they're not really just spending time by themselves. They're not really stopping or slowing down. Generally, when a person is really trying to avoid being by themselves, or avoid thinking, or avoid being alone, or avoid just moments of peace, generally they're trying to avoid what's going to come up in their mind. And if you've experienced trauma multiple times, or even one time, and you have not dealt with it, you're going to be afraid of having to sit in your loneliness by yourself and deal with it mentally. These types of people have plenty of friends. They always are out there in the streets, or they're always out there working, or they're always doing something to preoccupy their mind and their time from actually engaging in trying to heal what they've been through. And you see it all the time. We see people that we're like, why is he at work 20 hours? Why is he always in the club? Or why is he always on vacations or doing it? Because they're running away from dealing directly. Those are the same people who say things like meditation isn't good for you. Meditation isn't something you should do. Yeah, meditation is good for you, and it is something you should do. It's a great health practice. It's a great mental, emotional, spiritual practice. But people who are afraid to connect with themselves are people who are usually not able to deal with what's going to come up within them, whether it's in their mind, their emotions, their hearts, or whatever. And so that is a second way of telling that someone's not dealt with their trauma, is they try to avoid it by keeping busy doing everything else. And then the third thing is, you start to see how these people interact with other people. And it's usually in a way of judgment. It's usually in a way of distrust. They really have a hard time dealing 100% with a person. What do I mean when I say that? And I mean mostly in trust. They have a hard time 100% trusting anybody because someone hurt them. They've gone through something. And so you tend to see these people in and out of relationships because the relationship trust factor isn't there. They're not really good partners. They're not really good spouses because they tend to have just a slight trepidation about jumping full into something out of fear that they're going to be hurt again, out of fear that they're going to hurt somebody. It's just them trying to process, how can I love somebody whole? How can I show up in this whole when I'm still dealing with this? But they're not acknowledging it. They're looking at other things. So maybe we're not compatible. Maybe it's our sign differences, our zodiac sign differences. Or maybe that I just don't like to argue. I'm avoiding argument. All of that encompasses someone who has not dealt fully with their trauma. And so their interactions with people on an intimate level are hurt. And those three things show, like I said, they show up in different incantations around our lives. You'll see people who are always defensive. You'll see people out on the streets. Every time something comes up, it almost seems it bothers them. I have met women, and no shade to the women. I love you guys. You guys, are the rocks of our civilization, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, there's nothing like a defensive woman. I don't consider myself a threatening man. I don't consider myself who aggressively uses my masculinity or my manhood or whatever against women. I tend to try to be neutral because I see us as equals, and I don't believe in the whole patriarchy, hierarchy, all this other stuff that we've created socially along in humanity as it relates to gender and whatever. And so I don't find myself to be threatening. However, a woman who is hyper, sensitive or hyper, she's very, very attitude or always ready to pop off for every little thing, that is usually a woman who has been traumatized, who has not dealt with that trauma. The same thing as a man. Men, we generally aren't always going to have a snappy attitude, but you'll see us shut down, not say anything, get defensive, or act aggressively. In men, you'll see kind of that aggression, that fire, that anger. They deal with things angry. They go to the gym angry. They drive road rage angry. All of this anger stuff comes from someone who has pent up energy, and that from a trauma that they haven't dealt with, right? The second thing, working. Busy. Always busy, right? We see that all the time. It's almost like the American people on whole are traumatized or in traumatic mind because we work. We really don't discuss situations and things that impact us deeply. We've gone through quite a lot. If, for example, going through the situation that we've collectively, globally have been going through. You guys know what I'm talking about. It starts with a P, ends with a demic, right? We haven't really sat down as a people to process this traumatic situation that we've been in. We've just continued to go. We've been forced to stop somewhat, but even in that stop, we haven't really paused, right? And many of us refuse to pause. We don't want to pause. Why? It's because it'll make us be forced to deal with what we're going through. And when you add on top of that some of the other things like the racial insecurities and the economic insecurities and the political insecurities and all the other things that we got going on in this country on top of that big situation, it just adds more trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. But the problem is we're too busy to stop and just contemplate what this is and how this feels to us for whatever reason. That's that's avoiding, and that's avoiding. And then of course we know that relationships happen, but what I've noticed in my own personal just observation, it's not scientific, I didn't do any research, but I feel personally that relationships don't last anymore as long as they used to. I remember my grandparents and great-grandparents' relationships be 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, and forever and ever, it seems. And I even have friends whose relationships are like 50 years and longer. Now, that's not to say that those were always healthy relationships, because we know good damn well that sometimes those relationships were not healthy and they were just sticking together. They were just fighting it out, using the church to be their counselor or whatever, not getting therapy and not doing all the things that they need to do to have a healthy relationship. They were just holding on to the relationship. However, what I have noticed modern times is that if any little bad thing goes wrong in a relationship, people are looking for an exit out. Like there's nothing worth fighting for anymore, it seems. It seems as though if the relationship is not fitting into some category of what it should be or what this list of things say it is, then it's not a good relationship, and people jump out of relationships months, a year. They're out of a marriage or out of a relationship because of those things. And that's usually someone who hasn't dealt with their own stuff, their own trauma, that they don't know how to manage any problem, right? If you can't manage a big problem in your life, you're not going to manage the small day-to-day task. I'll repeat that. If you haven't managed to deal with a big problem that you've experienced, and if you just try to push through and ignore it, you're not going to be able to function day to day for a long time managing the small task. Why? Because it's all part of the same thing. You'll start to notice yourself get restless in the small task or irritated with little things. People do crazy things in traffic all the time. And if I had never dealt with my trauma, I would be full of road rage and probably in jail or probably going to jail multiple times over road rage. Meeting bad customer service. As bad as customer service has gotten, I probably would be in a crazy situation if I had not stopped to manage and to deal with my own personal trauma, because anything like that triggers people like that, and it's hard for our interactions as humans to interact if we're not healed in our own selves and in our own bodies. Think about it. Think about how rude people can be. Think about how things you've experienced. Usually you're experiencing someone who hasn't dealt with their trauma, and they're projecting their insecurities, their hurt, their anger, their anguish, whatever else out on you, because they haven't dealt with their stuff. And if you haven't dealt with your stuff, you're that person doing that to someone else. That is why it is super important that you take the time to go back and self-reflect about what you've been through, the good and the bad, dissect it, understand how it's impacted you and how it's manifesting in your life, if it's still manifesting, and go out and get the help if you need the help from a life coach. That is the whole reason why I wrote the book, The Freedom Prescription. I wrote The Freedom Prescription as a little, small, quick read, easy read book for anybody who just feels like there's something they just can't get over as it relates to trauma. And it's just a little quick read for them to go and just get little tools. It ain't the answer in all be all, but what it is it's a way to, it's really like a street sign that just says, these are some answers you can possibly use. Here's a guide, point you in that direction. Go and get the help that you need. I intentionally made that book small, and I intentionally made that book an easy read, because not everybody's a reader, but everybody almost have felt some kind of trauma, and I believe in my heart that most people want to heal from that stuff. Most people want to grow and be better from beyond that stuff. So I wrote that book, and I created this coaching firm for those particular reasons. I actually have a video, if you want to know more about trauma and thoroughly, I actually have a video where I discuss specifically what is trauma. And I also have a video specifically where I talk about the healing process. And because a lot of times we have these expectations that the healing process is instantaneous, and it's not. It's not. It's a process. It's a journey. We work through our healing all the time. Even people like me continually but intentionally work through my healing. And so those are 3 signs to know that you're still dealing with the trauma. Are you defensive? Do you get angry when anybody mentions the trauma or what you've been through or a situation similar or whatever to what you've been through? Does it invoke anger or emotion or some kind of defensiveness to it? 2, do you overwork? Do you try to busy yourself or do things to keep your mind from being still to try to avoid having to go in and think about what you've been through or how it's making you feel? And then 3, what are your interactions with other people? Whether it's in romantic relationships, friendships, out there on the streets, wherever, what are your interactions like? Your interactions are possibly being dictated through the trauma that you refuse to deal with. Now, let's face it, I will be honest. I believe everybody should deal with their trauma. I say that clearly. I do not mince that. I believe everyone who has gone through a trauma should take the time to deal with that trauma. However, if I'm being honest, I know that that's not a reality because most people have not been given the tools to deal. And if you don't have the tools, you don't have any desire to even deal because you don't know how. And like I said, that is where it is so important that you find the tools, whether it's the Freedom Prescription book, whether it's coaching classes, whether it's a free session, whether it's sessions with a therapist, whether it's with a psychologist, whether it's practicing meditation or yoga or something that's going to center and ground you, whether it's asking questions, hard questions, confronting the person that may have traumatized you, whatever the case may be, everyone should work on healing so that we can have a healed world. Because like I said earlier, collectively, I believe there is a collective trauma that we're all experiencing, that we've all experienced, and we're all acting through. But it is up to each individual person to go and do stock inventory of themselves, be self-reflective, and be intentional about their healing. And that's it. I had to go on and talk about that because it was really bearing on me, trauma and how many people are not healed and need healing, don't know where to turn. There's many avenues. You are not alone in dealing with this. I am a trauma survivor. I don't really like to say that because I don't want to attach my trauma to who I am. I'm someone who no longer lives in my trauma, even though I've experienced trauma. You know, I'm a trauma expert. And I think everybody who's gone through trauma is a trauma expert. We just don't always know how. We know what it feels like to be in traumatic mind and to experience trauma. We're expertise in that, but we don't always know how to heal. But there are answers out there to heal, to begin the journey to living the present life, a great life, a wonderful life, a beautiful life. That is a life that everybody born on this planet deserves. You, me, all of us. But in order to get to the present, you got to move beyond what happened so that you can be fully in the moment, in the now, present. So I had to talk about it. That's why it's been motivating on my heart. I've been thinking about it, circling in my brain or whatever. And you guys know, when I come from the place of passion and from my heart. That's it. As I always say, I love you all with the highest love. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe to the channel. If you haven't liked the video and given it a thumbs up, click that thumbs up button. You know, and share the video if you want to share it. Comment on the comment section below. You know, tell us about your trauma. Tell us how you've healed. Tell us what you've done, the steps you've taken to heal. Your words may be encouraging to someone else who is reading, who don't know how to get through. So let's help each other push through. Let's share our experiences. Let's talk about what we've been through. Anyway, I love you all, and I will see you in the next video.